The gaming world has been taken by storm by what many are calling the true sequel to Overwatch 1, Marvel Rivals. Because I'm a dumb content creator, I spent the week grinding the new 6v6 mode in Overwatch rather than abandoning ship to put everything into taking advantage of the new massive success of a competitor game, because for me, the soul of our game is on the line. The devs need both playtime and feedback to know what decisions to make for Overwatch in the future, and I wanted to do my part. 6v6 advocates want the game to entirely switch over to 6v6, or at least have its own ranked mode, but there are many in our community that feel it's the true version of Overwatch. The 6v6 have a long list of pros. Yes, of course it does. We'll go over those for sure. But equally, 6v6 has a big butt. A Kim Kardashian Brazilian butt lift kind of butt. And when this community is in the experimental phase, willing to try lots of different heroes, having low expectations for the results, everyone's jumping in to have a good time, and that's great. Imagine if we always played the game that way. Well, there's reasons why we don't. And I find it incredibly problematic that there's claims made about what we should expect from this mode, that it effectively solves world hunger, when in reality it has its own problems or universal Overwatch problems that matter no matter how many players are on the field. The short answer is, I think 6v6 is more fun, objectively, but needs hero bans even more than 5v5 did in order to be a competitively serious game mode. The performance of heroes is extremely variable in 6v6. Much harder to pick what you like, much easier for there to be meta-dominant synergies that destroy everything. Bugbear heroes like Widowmaker don't go away, still a problem in 5 or 6 players. Importantly, I think the support role is much worse. The net fun of the whole game goes up, but the support role for me is far less fun. And your tank can still be countered. In fact, possibly even worse than before. Hero selection matters more in 6v6, when we were told the opposite. It's really clear, it's really obvious, and a lot of the gameplay turns into an auto-battler, as in, select the right heroes and you easily win without needing to play the shooter game. That's what this mode is. And it's also more fun, because there's crazy things going on, there's more players. It's much easier for one ultimate to push the enemy into another ultimate, funneling the enemy around like lemmings. Bigger plays, more hype moments, more of a necessity for an ult fight, whereas 5v5 has a lot more skirmish fights, a lot more gunplay, a lot more individual carry, but 6v6 has a lot more teamwork. Mistakes in positioning are much easier to exploit, which also means it's harder to do things on your own, it's harder to express yourself with unique hero choices, because if you are targeted or you're the weak link in the team comp, everything can be gunning for you at the same time. A major benefit is the stats of everything are lower. Well, mainly the tanks in comparison to the live version of the game. Their tanking cooldowns are still quite effective, but their health pools are low enough that you can solo kill them with a lot of characters. Regardless of the relative power of any individual character or synergy, the design of Overwatch 2 characters is simply superb in comparison to Overwatch 1, okay? In terms of fun factor, playmaking ability, losing to things feels fair, because nothing has an outmoded carry impact like a Gigatank in 5v5. However, I'll warn you that the synergies are not even close to equal. Tier lists in 5v5 were a little weird. At every tier of play, there's always a lane on the map open for you to go take and hit your shots. You can justify anything. That is not how 6v6 works. As we're going to show with examples in the video, certain tanks hard counter other tanks. Like if you thought your tank could get countered in 5v5, well, it's just twice as more effective to counter the tank line now. So we're not in some harmonious hallelujah format where now lots of things are viable at the same time, but there is more variety potentially in the gameplay, of course. That's going to vanish as soon as there's a ranked mode and people are demanding you to play the shield character and AFK in front of them. But again, start tossing bans in there and we can start to have an interesting conversation about these other playstyles that are toned down a bit from their over-the-top Gigatank versions in 5v5. And if we've learned anything from Marvel Rivals, trying to force everything to be balanced is kind of nonsense. That variety and individuality, even if it causes you to lose really badly, should be prioritized over making everything balanced and competitive. But hey, that was my opinion before they reworked every builder character because they wanted to appease one-tricks who wanted to be able to climb on the ladder. That was their old philosophy, and some of it's still baked in. Everything's kind of power crept in this current patch, but power creep is a thing we'll have to address at another time. We don't have time for that right now. The point is, the tank designs themselves are more fun, more healthy, even if radically unbalanced based on the synergies you can have, as we're going to show. Like a hawk, I tried to track the queue times over the course of the week. The first few days, queues were instant for everybody always. As the week went on, they got weaker, very weak in fact, but also they got weak for Overwatch as a game overall. More and more people are flocking over to Marvel Rivals, so I don't really know how to take data from that. Also, you're going to get a lot of players from the history of Overwatch coming back to play tank again. Will they actually remain to play tank in the long term? Also, they just added the best tank they've ever added to the history of the game in Hazard, and we had a lot of tanks in 5v5 once Hazard came out this season, at least in my queue times. I think this result will be different if we were in that really bad Mauga release meta, but nitpicking these results is not really useful. The point is, for quite a while, everyone wanted to try it, and overall, scanning the reviews online, most people are for it, while there's a percentage of people that really dislike it and prefer the slower, more arena shooter-based gameplay of 5v5, and I think a small rumbling of tank players prefer the forgiving stats of being a gigatank, and that's a sentiment that's likely going to grow over time. The more you realize how little you get to do as a tank, how important it is to be on the right tank, just like in 5v5, but with less stats, and importantly, how important it is to be on the right tank while also synergizing with your team, or else you don't do anything. I didn't really see anybody complain about the team comp in my week of playing, which I actually think that vibe and culture is more to benefit with the fun factor of it all, because I actually think losing to meta characters and meta synergies is simply more oppressive in 6v6, as we're going to break down with some examples. But yes, it's going to be a long video. But to be clear, to put a poll in the ground, I think the esports friendly version and direction of this game was a failure, and I think they should reset the table, go back to 6v6, add hero bans like Marvel Rivals did, like I always wanted, rather than bend over backwards to try to balance the free swap format. That's something that I think doesn't really ever get brought up. Marvel Rivals takes the mechanic just like Overwatch has, where you can freely swap to any character, and it has open queue where that's also across roles as well. That results in Heroes Swap Roulette in 5v5, but also no cost or downside to run meta synergies in 6v6. Where other games either distribute power based on the economy of CSGO or the item shop of a MOBA, the power in Overwatch is just in the hero roster, the synergies it has, and your ability to press the H key. Why we tried to rebalance the entire game rather than deal with that fundamental format issue is kind of beyond me. Not to say I think free swap needs to go away, but it was the actual issue behind 5v5 or 6v6 in both cases. It's a casual system, meaning that in quick play, you can freely swap to whatever you need to so you don't feel trapped on whatever given hero you're on. But it doesn't work competitively. It never has. And they've spent years bending over backwards, trying to rearrange it in 6v6 and rearrange it in 5v5. Neither has really been the issue. All that being said, no matter which format we're in, they both need work in order to function for all the different purposes that we're trying to aim all at the same time. And especially if Overwatch wants to compete up against Marvel Rivals, leaning into the wacky antics of 12 players on the map and the high-octane gameplay, I think is going to be better for Overwatch overall. I like Marvel Rivals quite a lot, but it's also got hero bans on launch day. 6v6 now, trying to win back my affection, feels like the return of my toxic borderline personality disorder ex, promising that she's changed. We were so good together. We're meant to be. I promised I'm more balanced now. I won't have oppressive meta synergies that dominate the entire game, invalidating most of the hero roster. I won't do that again. Meanwhile, Marvel Rivals already has implemented the common sense solution that I had asked and begged for since Brig came out. Rather than try to meticulously balance the game to perfection, which isn't possible for all tiers of play, Marvel Rivals has hero bans at Diamond and above, already in the tournaments. And guess what? They also have a sniper problem. Oh my goodness. You don't say. Trying to balance this game as an esport and a casual game, and for it to have fun, and for all heroes to be viable at the same time was such an impressive mistake. Only Blizzard could have made it. I got laughed at in Overwatch 1 when I said balance isn't the most important thing. For years of time, especially from the competitive crowd, now these same people are switching it up, realizing that I was right for years, which isn't the first time that's happened, is it? Because 5v5 is way more balanced. It's much easier to play the heroes you want because there's always a free lane on the map, whereas add more characters into the team comp, those interactions, one comp versus another, are amplified. So if your comp counters their comp, it is exponentially harder for the enemy to interact with anyone. Whereas in 5v5, you're more free to kind of do what you want, but players still find a reason to dislike it. Because as it turns out, a lot of players did not play Overwatch for a fine-tuned competitive experience. Especially with Marvel Rivals having the success that it has now, we should have known this to be the case the entire time. And rather than try to fit a square peg into a round hole to make Overwatch as competitively sound as Valorant, we could have just had a hero draft for the pros years ago, and we could have avoided wasting our time chasing a parked car, running in circles with this game, as if we don't understand the ramifications of these decisions. As I'm ranting and raving here, we are going to have quite a few gameplay breakdowns in this video. But so far the footage is just highlights of crazy shit that's been going on in 6v6 gameplay that we haven't really seen since 6v6. Because while I'm going to go through the long list of nitpicks and downsides and meta problems and synergy problems, the gameplay just has a higher peak high potential. And if I get anything across to you today, it is that we need to be accurate with our feedback to the developers, because they can actually be so stupid to listen to the wrong things we tell them. As in, the community told them they want a balanced game, they got it, and didn't like that. Because as it turns out, even with 5v5 being more balanced, it's still prone to meta-dominant heroes and synergies, stale metas, and anything any competitive game ever suffers from, but especially Overwatch. Some of those problems are worse in 6v6 in many ways, but the upside is you get more chaos, you get more diverse gameplay, you just get more going on. Like, look at how many things are happening on screen at any given time. Is it harder to track? Is it harder to make decisions? Is it harder to count how many enemies are around any given corner? Is it harder to know if you're contributing in the right way to the team? Yes. Of course it is. And 6v6ers won't like this sentence, but is it less competitive? Without a doubt. If you have a mode where you can kind of vanish in the team comp, yet still win, that is not the more competitive game. 5v5 is directly confrontational on each lane of the engagement always. You're always in a small, skirmishy matchup, and you can always shoot your way out to create an advantage. 6v6 has much more strategy and team play, which means their team might be better than yours, and there's nothing you can do about it, unless you're a Smurf player playing 3 or 4 tiers below where you should be. Having played Marvel Rivals and then back to 6v6, I remember the complexity of how the resources of the team can be allocated or misallocated in this type of mode. In 5v5, it's much more playable in terms of pick up and playable. Pick your character, shoot the enemy. Are you struggling? Perform better or pick a character that can go win a matchup somewhere. Pretty easy to understand. Whereas 6v6 begins to re-enter the formula of shield breaking on the enemy. Who is your team healing? Who is your team peeling for? Who is your team giving offensive resources? Who are you targeting on the enemy? Where are you deciding to fight? In 5v5, you can control a lot of this as an individual. There's more space on the map for you to have a carry impact by you putting your character in the position they need to be. But the ramification of your teammates' hero decisions, positioning, timing, target selection matters so much more that all of a sudden now there's all these extra layers to worry about. A simple way to say it is if your team staggers, it's impossible to carry the game. The game's just over. All competitive games have what's called advantage state versus disadvantage state. 5v5, a lot of characters and a lot of team fights and a lot of regroups, a lot of skirmishes. You can shoot your way out to swing the fight back potentially. In 6v6, it's much more important that you regroup with your team and execute your ultimates, especially synergies, with good economy. Because think of it like this. Advantage state, disadvantage state. The enemy has the map, so that means they have an advantage. With an extra player, the team with the advantage has an extra series of cooldowns and an extra ultimate to initiate with. That's a layer of oppressive complexity that I think a lot of players like. They like how horrible it can be, because there's something to master there. Whereas 5v5 with the arena shooter gameplay, a lot of it's just like jump back in and shoot more and shoot your way out. The long-term strategy decisions of 6v6 gets a little bit more complicated. Like, should I try to clutch this fight or not? Should we save up for a bigger impact? There's more eco fights where, okay, the enemy's using an ult, we gotta wait, we can't really fight, we can't really commit. Because the enemy has so many players, you would have to do a lot more to try to swing a fight back if they're already initiating with their ult. This is getting really nerdy really fast, I know. The point is big explosions, okay? Like, being at a disadvantage is worse in 6v6. But the upside is when you're in control, oh my goodness, the higher highs. when you're outplaying the enemy, when you have the better comp, when your team is executing better. There's something to that casual appeal of 6 players on the field. Less players, more confrontational, more direct, more players, more things to light up in the kill feed, more accidental kills. While I do think it makes it more casual, less reliable, the higher upside of the dragon you can chase with this game is worth it. Because the alternative, I think, pleases the community even less. I liked arena shooters. I grew up on them. So 5v5 being more of an arena shooter is fine with me. I like all of the roles. Top 1% on all of them now, including damage for the first time, having mastered the new thick boy projectile sizes, including the Pharah rework. And even though I think support is much worse than 6v6, the net upside of the overall fun factor is a huge win for the game, and a product that I do think competes with Marvel Rivals. And since the esport appeal of this game has failed, why continue down that road? Who cares? How's that going to help the long-term viability of this game? Design the game to be fun first and fix the esport later somehow with other added modifications. I remember when our game had the same level of enthusiasm that Marvel Rivals is getting now. Marvel Rivals is way less balanced than Overwatch in either form. But nobody cares. If we had our community dominate Marvel Rivals dialogue the way it's dominated our game, the snipers would be nerfed to the ground, so you'd have to be a pro player to even pick them. The wacky ults, like Jeff spitting you off the map, would have a whole bunch of toned back restrictions to not make it as crazy as it is. Support buttons would be far less impactful, especially their ultimates. While a lot of these things as a competitive sweaty myself, I agree with, on the other hand, can't we see how this is all missing the point? None of it matters. It never did matter. It's precisely that wacky shit that does. And ultimately, that's why I want 6v6 to come back. Break the game again. Let us debate endlessly about tier lists and what synergy is or isn't broken. Make the game broken again, because it's more interesting broken than balanced. Now we're gonna get into example by example, justifying everything I just told you. Now let's talk about tanks for a while. In general and in specific. This game is really going to highlight the removal of the tank passive. You get more ult from shooting them. They didn't diminish it all the way down to 0, but importantly, this means your supports will gain ult faster than before. My teammate over comms wants me to go a lot deeper than I am here, but the enemy's comp is pretty defensible. My Zarya's getting roasted, swaps to Hog, which maybe leads to a whole nother conversation about off tanks, but we'll get to that later. Importantly, down trading, I refuse to make a mistake on the dive. Not going to over-aggress to fight, but unfortunately something that I think is clear to realize is how much harder it is for this comp to operate in comparison to the other comp. My team's making quite a few mistakes, and because my stats are so limited, it's not like I can really easily kill anything on my own. But I know if I hard commit once we use our support ultimates, there's a good chance we can take the space and rush in. Targeting the Mauga here was probably a mistake. Crossing onto the Sigma, who was gatekeeping my team, would have been better, but either way, generally happy with this dive performance, and it only gets better after this, as now I'm going to be able to play off my Ana and make use of the other change that I thought was incredibly important, one that I wish they just had in 5v5 this whole time, by the way. Knockback resistance is just gone, so characters that apply boops like Winston's Primal Rage can utterly disrupt tanks being an immovable wall in front of your team. I actually gift my Ana player who's on the high ground play of the game by knocking around the enemy, making clear lines for my teammates. You guys might not know this, but Winston's actually my most played character. Tank overall is, Ramatra being number 2. And well, this game in particular, it was like I was solo tank anyway, because I had a Roadhog. But this game felt to me as familiar as riding a bike. Not expecting to do too much, jumping in front of my team to tank for them, reading the man advantage state. I don't have to be the superstar here, I just have to be a teammate. When I notice the enemy's over ulting, I hold Primal Rage. You don't want a Primal inside the Mauga ult, just take the L there, and doing so makes our fight at strength when we have advantage so much better, that we utterly steamroll, rushing in together, gain control, and another money Primal Rage draws so much aggro from the enemy, displacing them for easy focus fire for my teammates. We roll the cart all the way into C, and they C9. I die here at the end, but just think of how easy I made it for my entire team by corralling the enemy into a corner, displacing them out into bad angles. I tank their offense, displace their formation. It's everything that the peak tank gameplay can be in this format. Winston in 6v6, that's perhaps a little bit obvious. Let's talk about some Overwatch 2 tanks. Ramatra is one that we maybe were a little worried about. Remember, the stats and numbers and balance doesn't matter for this video, but from a mechanics point of view, does the character interact on the front line? Well, his biggest weakness is his ultimate can now be blocked off potentially by 2 tanks, which makes it quite weak, I would say. And we almost toss away the lead here at the end, mainly because I'm trying to go use the ultimate, but we do swing it all the way back, in part due to the frontline pressure I can put down. This is another game where I succeed without really any tank synergy, frankly. So far in the video, I haven't even mentioned that once. In fact, I'm only going to mention it as a downside, I think. But Ram has a lot of options. Hazard and Ramatra are very similarly designed. They have a gun and a melee and a CC. They're my 2 favorite tanks to play. I think it made it a little bit easier when the enemy supports decided to swap heroes. Ram has always been one of my favorite characters to hunt down Kariko and Punisher. Either team could have won this game. They only came back because we staggered a bit. Ram has been reported to be not performing that well in 6v6 tests, but he felt better to me the more I practiced him and really made use of the spacing advantage you gain by moving faster in Nemesis. With how many options he has, he's one of the better options to still stay on the cart and make decisions from there. Very flexible. I liked him a lot. A tank that I think is surely saved by the 6v6 format is Mauga, who I have always liked his character and his mechanics in theory, but in 5v5, since you need a main tank to kind of anchor the point, and that's just what the main tank does in 5v5, I mean, there's only one tank. 6v6 opens up so many different options for positioning that you can actually see the skill expression of this character shine. First of all, it's a little bit more permissible for hard counters to exist in 6v6 because you're not really expected to have to be able to compete in your own duel spot. At least I think it could be argued that that has to be the reason why people don't complain about it as much, I would assume. Because Mauga hard counters some tanks. Their stats are lower, he blows them up, he lifesteals off their face, but I think you badly need a main tank when playing him. A cool thing is when the enemy's out of position and you start taking aggressive angles, he's a character that can really punish that quickly. And while he's going to struggle to reopen space in theory, like he doesn't defend the team, his mobility is so insane that he can just go get his own crossfire angles on his own and use off-angle pressure, sort of like a Tracer might, to make space. Like, he can get to health packs on his own, and he self-heals with his shout. So while maybe it's the peak value to give your team the shout, remember they've slowly reworked his kit to have buffed the slam. So really the slam and lighting up somebody with both barrels is where a lot of the value is. I definitely noticed playing against him or as him that he's incredibly easy to focus. And that was going to lead to some high-octane risk-reward gameplay, which maybe you don't really want on your tank, but we survived with Wrecking Ball in 6v6 for a while, and that was kind of the same thing. He's sort of like that. He's like a unique playstyle. It's going to be hard to fit in all the time. But I think it's easy to say that this is all much more interesting than him being a selection in 5v5, where maybe you select him to shoot up at a flyer, but that solo tank role is so competitive that certainly more of a niche playstyle or concept makes a lot more sense in 6v6, because tanks in 5v5 that are inherently risky, like Mauga or Ball, are unhealthy for gameplay, whether they work or don't. Side note, I think Ball sucks in this mode. It could just be the patch as well. Perhaps one of the worst tanks, but we're not going to talk about him in the video. Only so many tanks I have time to talk about. Now let's talk about off tanks, and then after, synergy. D.Va is the off-tank of this game. A lot of people want to play Zarya, but she is incredibly overrated, especially with the reworked maps, how escapable targets are. Lots of things have extra cooldowns or their own mobility. Attacks are going to be coming from all over the place, and there is one character that plays the off-tank role to me. It's D.Va. You can play D.Va with everything, against everything, because while beams go through defense matrix, there just isn't really enough that are viable enough to matter. In Overwatch 1, D.Va had somewhere between like a 97 and 99% pick rate competitively for a reason. When people talk about the off-tank position, they're kind of just talking about D.Va, because she does it all. She helps exchange cooldowns on the front line, making space there. She has all the tools to peel for the back line. She can isolate damage when they're out of position. It's everything you would want an off-tank to do. And if you know how to play this, it feels amazing. The general rule is hold a corner. Don't take damage. Be patient and punish. That's it. I actually think it's incredibly straightforward how to do. And if you listen to some of the best D.Va coaches, like I have, shout out to my favorite coach for Giving, it's always about doing less and just standing in a higher efficiency spot. And that's where I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the downside of this. Here we got a dive map, Dorado. I've got a Winston player that clearly knows what cooldown cycling is. He's set up top of red to do what's called a drop engage, as in he holds his cooldowns, falls down on the enemy, and has bubble to initiate and leap to get away. As he starts to get focused, I mask him or put defense matrix over him to land even more tanking around him. This is important because this is what the actual game is about. Tank synergy. In 5v5, we have one tank, and it's super reliable and obvious how their mechanics work. While it's arguable that there is more skill in executing this together with a teammate, it also becomes required. And I say required because the enemy is not going to have any tank synergy. They're going to really attempt to go make solo plays. You know, play the shooter game. I was told tanks are better in 6v6. Let me just run at them with Hazard and Joker Queen. How's that going to work? Well, we're established on the high ground, so all my squishies have an easier time looking down at the engagement, either shooting at the squishy's backline or healing me. And our tank line, because it does cycle cooldowns, is a synergy that works, is only going to die once this entire game. And even when we do die, it's dying stalling the cart. So it isn't even the worst kind of death. Here, what we're looking at is the oppressiveness of tank synergy and how much more important it is to have the right team comp in Overwatch 2 6v6, just like it was in Overwatch 1. You cannot play the wrong heroes in 6v6 because the uphill battle of having a worse comp is insurmountable for the vast majority of players most of the time. In 5v5, it's possible to get full held on Dorado. Sure, it happens, but I see it happen far less often than I remember it happening in 6v6. And the reason is what we're looking at. In 5v5, there's only one tank to get around, so you can't like gum up almost all of the enemy's offense every single engage. It's not possible, right? In 5v5, someone's gonna get a flank, someone's gonna be able to get some offense, someone's gonna be able to aim their ult in the right direction and kill somebody to at least trade some things out. If our squishies never die and our tanks deny almost all of the offense, even if the tanks sometimes get traded, the positional advantage that our squishies have looking down at the fight is outrageous. The enemy Hazard eventually tries to swap to a Roadhog. Little does he know, while maybe Hog could counter one of the dive tanks, you gotta think of tanks in 6v6 as a synergy. In 5v5, everyone seems to know the mechanics of Zarya shoots through Diva. Counter. Even though the Diva could avoid the Zarya. We don't have time to get into that. That's a whole other tank mastery guide that I had a shelf because we want to switch the game back to 6v6. We don't have time to explain how wrong everybody is about that. But instead, in 6v6, you have to think about Winston Diva as one character because they play together. And frankly, it isn't that difficult to mask your Winston with Defense Matrix. But people don't learn how to do it, or don't want to do it, or don't select to do it. That's the issue with 6v6. We can look at a long list of hero options, and only a few matter as far as I'm concerned. A few synergize, and a bunch don't. 6v6 gameplay looks a lot better because everybody sucks at it. Very rarely in my testing did I see anyone be dominant on tank the way I'm explaining for you two. The way that you can choose to just not make any mistakes, play what I think is a pretty easy tank, Diva, and the next we're going to talk about is Rein, and just point the defenses in the right direction, and your whole team has a much easier time against theirs. And not only that, hard counter picks. Way harder than you could ever counter pick in 5v5. Because 5v5, you have lanes to get away. You could ignore the tank fight if you wanted. You cannot do that in 6v6 because they gain the entire map, okay? I cannot understate how meta-breaking this actually is, because we spent the last few years complaining that tank heroes are too easily countered, not realizing what the alternative is in 6v6. That you can create tank synergies that cannot be countered. They could add 100 shotgun tanks to this game, and Winston Diva will still counter them on Dorado, because the cooldown cycle of eating either the major counter cooldowns or the focus fire onto Winston prolongs his life, making him way stronger and uncounterable in comparison to 5v5. There's so many tanks with shouts and shotguns, Swiss Army knives that can make pancakes on a Tuesday, doesn't matter. Add 1,000 of them. From a medic theory crafting point of view, the easiest thing is to silence all of the offense of the enemy. It's hard to lose if you can't get shot. Really? In a shooter game? You don't say. This Dorado, our tank line had nearly 10,000 mitigation, over 3 times what the enemy tanks had. Meanwhile, we had positional advantage because we started on the defense. So they're fighting uphill with a bad tank line. Frankly, their tanks were mostly just targeting our tanks, who were built to take a licking and keep on kicking, with supports on the high ground that never died. I'm going to keep reiterating it, but this BS complexity, obvious imbalance, oppressive tank synergy is still a better game. Because the most important thing about Overwatch and Overwatch fans is they don't like the thing they asked for. They wanted balance, they got it, they hate it. In 5v5, even if your tank's countered, you could just ignore that tank fight, go play the shooter game, get some kills, and all of a sudden you're playing the 5v5 skirmisher, arena shooter gameplay. In 6v6, their tanks can be immortal and your tanks can be countered. That's the gap. Why did we not think this would be the case? Why did so many people argue with me about this? If it's a rock, paper, scissors type tank matchup, and you could pick 2 rocks against 2 scissors, what do you think's gonna happen? Why would you think anything different? But the reason why this is even more severe than that is because overlapping tank kit has exponential rewards with teamwork. It isn't just your one tank counters their one tank times 2. It's your 2 tanks are 3 times better than anything their 2 tanks could combine to be. That's the math of it, guys. I'm not exaggerating. That's what health point and cooldown cycling is. Last D.Va example, I had a really good game as Winston, but do eventually feel I have to swap because of the multitude of shotguns against me. And I don't have a D.Va in my team protecting me, making me immortal. So instead I picked the D.Va character because, well, they've got a lot of guns in the shooter game. And the more heroes you add to the team comp, the more valuable defenses become because more players can be behind the immortality. The math is pretty simple. You point DM in a direction. Are you getting more value if it's eating 5 players worth of value or 6? And then remember, in 5v5, everyone splits up more. So much so that our analysts, quote unquote, say that D.Va doesn't function as a tank in 5v5, yet she hard dominates in 6v6. The reason's simple. Characters have their own aggression and defensive cooldowns. They go in, use them, gain focus fire, you DM them, they get out, they get healed. What could you possibly add to the tank roster that is better for teamwork than that? What's better than not being able to die? Not oppressive, by the way, guys. Nothing oppressive by swapping characters and my whole team easily winning every fight and I can't be killed. The strategy of this is so severe that these bad matchups that I'm exploiting in the test, you would never even attempt to run in a ranked game. You'd get flamed for even trying. That happens in 5v5, but it's not like you don't have a chance to ever win a fight. It's just not true, because one tank doesn't have the cooldowns to suffocate everything on the enemy team. 2 tanks could. Here's a few examples now with Reinhardt, a character that I noticed a lot of players in comments said was weak. When I watched players play Reinhardt, they're dying left and right, and I'll admit, I drop my shield, I die in a second. But the thing that's strong about Rein, especially on this particular patch, they giga buffed his shield. So that means if I just put my shield in front of my guns on my team comp, my guns can't be shot. So I'm just going to escort my Zarya and Cassidy around the map and make it so that their guns can't shoot mine. This is like effectively having immortality on your team while the enemy has nothing. Mauga has a shout with lifesteal, but it doesn't work against a shield or a bubble. And he does crit damage against bodies, so his shield break is actually pretty mediocre. It takes a lot of ammo for him to crack a shield. So this is how, as Rein, I was doing so much by doing nothing. The important part about this is to point out, in Overwatch 1, every single team in ranked, outside of like, let's say the top 30 or 20% maybe, wanted you to play Reinhardt. So almost every game, you wanted a Rein on your team. And especially when you combine with the fact of what I just said about D.Va, Rein and D.Va turn off the whole game. This is why we gotta admit that, like, this is not balanced, guys. Maybe the highest level players will find other characters that are oppressive, but for the average player, it is so hilariously easy to point defenses in front of your team and nobody can die. How are we not seeing this, guys? I was told 6v6 was more balanced, that tank synergies were not oppressive. Well, the enemy wants to pick Mauga and Queen here. There's a lot of these shotgun characters that exist, guys, and Mauga's probably the worst. Now, we already talked about Mauga, and like, yeah, if he off angles and learns to go deep and doesn't fight the front line or shoot the shield like he's going to this whole time, then maybe he starts to be all right. But what's easier, learning to do that or AFKing on cart? Now, again, I'll make it clear. I want the broken downsides of 6v6. I want that. It's good for content. It's good for my career. It's good for the casual appeal of this game, but it is not balanced. Let's look at another game. New game mode now. New Junk City. I'm going to play Reinhardt. The enemy's on Hazard Ball to start, and I'm going to regen and cycle my shield. a lot. Crucially, despite barely ever swinging, I get some kills with Fire Strike, gain advantage, and just by playing slow and regenerating my shield over and over and over again, my team is immortal. The game just started and I have 4,000 shielding already. I regenerated my shield twice. The Overwatch community is kind of strange when it comes to Reinhardt, because I don't actually like playing him that much, but I think he's really powerful considering how easy he is. When I play Ram, I have to hit all my shots and land my crowd control, and I'm constantly spacing and moving. Granted, it's a little bit more of a hero shooter skill set as opposed to just a straight up MOBA teamwork skill set. But in my experience, playing this game at 6v6 for 6 years, it still shows that the enemy is attracted to the blue rectangle like moths to a flame. Look at this clip. The Hazard tries to ult me, the Ana throws a nade at me when I have full health, the Sombra's trying to hack me from the right, and yeah, I eventually die here, but it's like the tanking pressure that I'm applying just by standing here. As long as I manage my health and don't overpress in my shield, it's oppressive to have this character on your team when the enemy doesn't have a shield. The enemy support was blaming their tank player, so I went back to watch their point of view. Playing as Lucio goes extremely aggressive at the start, not really synced with the dive. Remember, we talked about the dive playstyle earlier. So much harder to dive than play Deathball, by the way. Holding hands behind a shield, like you can kind of tell where everybody is. Wrecking Ball is the worst for this. Hazard is kind of a middle point, I think, because it's not like he goes on as far of flanks. I love playing Hazard, but he can do a lot just straight up on the front line, so he doesn't have to necessarily set up behind, but we're going to begin to transition to the other major weakness of 6v6, and it is the lack of agency from the support role. So our support this whole round here, our support hero from the enemy team, just witnessed his dive tanks fight the brawler tanks in close range. I think Queen is like pretty nuts against what they have, but it could have been any brawler tank. Bad engagement, and while, yeah, in 6v6, mistakes are more easily punished. That is true. It also means that playing the easiest thing is often best. So you lose a lot of variety in the 6v6 mode just because what you're going to do to default in a difficult meta is just do what's easiest. I mean, it's just hard to watch from his point of view. With the shield, we press in, have tempo the entire time. We have Lucio Moira, easy characters to play. We follow good tank rotations. I get anti twice, doesn't matter at full HP. I manage my health, get rolled. Now, I know in 5v5, you guys don't like losing with a ball on your team either, but tanks are worse in 5v5, believe it or not. Killing one is harder, but outplaying two can be impossible without the right team effort. It's true, 6v6 has more strategy. It also has more bad strategy. So buckle in, this is just the game we'll have if this is the game, with more options in it that are hard throws. A similar blowout can happen in 5v5. Let's say we have a ball against a Queen. I think Queen mostly wins that matchup, but all of the squishy characters are going to be colliding with duels all game. They might still lose, they might win, who knows? But we just see here with this Ana player, he sees a shield all game. And I can coach him and say like, well, hold on to your cooldowns a lot longer, wait till the Rhine's down, be more patient. But his tanks are going in and fighting fast as dive tanks against brawlers. His teammates are making bad decisions that have huge ramifications on how playable his experience is. That's what 6v6 is. We'll talk more about support, but I've got another example of teammates being frustrating from the other point of view now as the tank player. This game on Hollywood was precisely why I was open-minded to 5v5 and like tanking in 5v5. With 6v6, how many times do I gotta get a perfect dive on their out-of-position squishy to make sure that we mark that damage angle, and every time I look back, my backline is retreating. I'm gonna win this game, by the way, but this is the most frustrating 6v6 win ever, as I'm constantly looking around hoping that I'm getting healed, because remember, the guy in front gets shot by an extra enemy. So not only is your stats lower, you take more damage as the frontline character now. So in theory, you have a cooldown extra for your off tank to give you, but I don't think that's the norm. Or should I say it's not normal to know when it's ideal to use them? Not necessarily. And maybe players will get better at this in theory, but in Overwatch 1, it was so painful for so many years, guys. I've got a Juno Ana backline, like the speed and mobility means they can dodge the Zarya, and with the Widow dead, they can't die. They just have to walk in and get an angle on me. And a lot of times I'm like waiting for them to catch up, and I can't function without them. As you play at higher and higher tiers, none of what I just said matters. This matters for playing at medal ranks. which none of these streamers do. They don't care about you or how hard it is to tank in this environment. Because ultimately, if you want to rank up with these kinds of players, you're not going to play the normal main tank. They're not good enough. Because I'm doing the right things and they're letting me die just because they don't want to get an angle where they're supposed to. Again, I'm going to win this game, but it is not a fun time. And to be fair to them, my team are trying. They just don't know how to time their abilities on the main tank to make it maximally helpful. There's a huge difference between bubbling your Winston as he's taking heat or starts to lose some health versus using the cooldown immediately before he's even jumping in. The layering of that sustain is exponentially different because you lose some arbor health, gain the bubble, punish them from focusing you, you get healed in the meantime. That's how you're supposed to do it. But if you don't do that, then like your health is, I don't know, a quarter less or something, maybe more. Tanking synergy has exponential value, which is why balance is unobtainable because you have to somehow balance not just for the synergies, for executing the synergies. This game's been out 100 years, and purportedly this is what players wanted. The people in this mode signed up because they want this, to play this Zarya character, to mistime their bubbles. When I tell you people didn't want to play main tank in Overwatch 1, it had nothing to do with the balance of the game. It has to do with everything I just said. There's no numbers you can give any character that's fair at all that fixes everything I just said. Luckily, we don't have to play Winston anymore. We've got lots of other characters in the cast that have more flexible cooldowns and are more updated to a fun tank experience. So you're just not going to get a Winston player a lot of times. You don't get Winston players now, and he's an amazing tank at 5v5. But I'll tell you this, when the enemy does know synergies and you don't, well, good luck. But now let's go to another thing here. I try to play Ram against this. It doesn't end up working because even as I start to make space on the front line, working out their cooldowns and start to win, the fact that they have an Ana set up in the back just means they're going to out-brawl this. Not to mention, I have a Roadhog, which is just not going to help the brawl fight at all. Don't worry, guys, because counter-picking is still incredibly strong in this game. Rein Zarya, very good at brawling, have a lot of stats if you target them. But since the map is big enough, finally it's a case where I can play ball, displace the backline, and go dive Widowmaker. Before you know it, that pesky Ana healing everybody is out of position and the Widow's dead. And from that point, we're going to be able to use our mobility advantage to snowball the streets phase easily. And because the enemy Rein doesn't know how to outplay this, he's going to make a crucial mistake of trying to go to the cart to try to get another touch. But the problem is when the mobile comp is flanking you, that's an auto loss. So you actually have to stack with this kind of deathball comp and play in a spot that you all can play together, even if it means you're not going to get as many fights on the cart. But because they don't do that, they stretch out, make it easy for us to divide and conquer. Hard counter pick. Gosh, counter picking is so easy in 6v6. Easy, easy, easy counter pick win. It went from looking like we couldn't win a team fight to auto winning just because I switched playstyles. Kind of crazy how that works. Speaking of counter picking, that is something that is claimed to not exist in 6v6. Not even close to true. The heroes have always countered each other from the launch version of the game to now. We've had hard counters, we've had soft counters, but counters exist. Let's run through a few examples of that then, shall we? Diva, meta off tank. We're going to be playing with Hazard, who is maybe the top meta tank. He's weak to brawling, but he doesn't have to take the brawl in a lot of cases, especially on an objective mode where you have a lot of room to establish a fight as defense. So this enemy Rein is going to try a few different tactics, like all-inning to trade 1-for-1. Don't want to do that as a brawl character against a more mobile comp because they can quickly punish you and return to another fight. So it's kind of a doomed to fail strategy. There's a chance if everyone's mobile on your team that maybe that breaks it open and everybody rushes in, but if you're playing a brawly style, you have to stay together. Hazard and Diva can flow in and out of the combat and most importantly, run from it. We don't have to get swung on or beamed down by the Zarya Rein, and even in some cases where we do, we're absorbing a lot of heat while stalling the objective while there's time for my team to fight the rest of everybody else. Very, very similar to the Dorado example, honestly. Only difference perhaps is we have a Widowmaker who is said to be more easily countered or not a problem in 6v6, which is also not true. The Hazard Diva synergy is like two Enforcer style tanks with a lot of optionality. In the last second here, they try to go Roadhog. That's not going to do anything. Absolute blowout. They never really get a foothold, and they never kill me. Okay, Havana now. Sniper map. So we're going to run double shield. Oh yeah, that's still a thing. They nerfed Orisa somewhere in the late stages of Overwatch 1, and Rein Sig was pretty good. Still is. They've got this really useful Roadhog character on the enemy team who doesn't do anything while he tries to heal himself. making for easy pins, and a Sigma, who gets countered also by Rein. Rein counters both of these. We're kind of lied to by the high-level streamers that universally Rein gets countered by shotgun tanks because higher tier players know how to play poke better, but in your average tier game, a Rein running things down, pressing in, forcing space is a auto win. Enemies don't know how to kite and create enough poke pressure on the shield to deny Rein from carrying. There very quickly becomes problems like a Lifeweaver pick is a massive liability, not a good character in 6v6 at all, isn't great in 5v5 either, but because so much of everything is about like space on the map or tank interactions, you kind of need to be able to make plays, not just save a mistake. Like, it just doesn't really feel like it does anything to me. Thinking Mog is kind of underrated, especially against Doomfist, because I feel he counters Doom in this patch. Another counter pick, easily blow them up. Kind of not contested at any point in that game. And frankly, mainly just because we had a better comp. Maybe the root game, you could say the Widow carried, but like, what's the enemy to do with two shields walking at them and their tank getting outplayed over and over and over and over again? Isn't this everything you guys complained about in 5v5, just worse? How is it not? How does enemy have more windows to do anything? Okay, another Havana game. This time, Ramatra's gonna ride the cart. Try to give him the chance. Ram's a little less statted than Rein. But oh look, Hazard Winston want to fight the front line and you auto lose. Great. Can't pick Winston on this map. Are you crazy? Here's the thing. A big problem I have with people criticizing 5v5 is like they only want to run the tank at the other tank. Well, tanks, just like every character, counter each other sometimes. So you have to run from a matchup that you don't win. But we're in 6v6 and they're still doing that. The Winston is fighting the Ram, the brawler character. Again, why do we keep seeing dive characters fight brawler tanks? Why do you guys do this? You would think you picked 6v6 so you could play the strategy team comp builder game, but you're still playing it like you're playing 5v5 anyway. And by the way, this guy is going to swap now to Zarya, who I guess because in the middle ranks of 5v5, you can just counter the tank, or you heard your streamer say that's all you have to do is counterpick the tank. Well, just so you know, Zarya doesn't counter Ram. The other way around. Ram's got all of the optionality to not shoot the bubbles as well as punish her in her windows of exploitability. So now you're just taking a brawl that you're going to lose again. I'm just really trying to get my brain around this because everyone shouted at me that 6v6 was superior because your tank can't get countered. But what are we watching exactly in these last few clips? I mean, how many clips do I need? Your tank will still be on the wrong hero and can still be outplayed. Even if they're on the right hero, they can get outplayed. The only difference, 5v5, 6v6, is we're rolling them harder than we could in 5v5. The enemy squishies can do less with the mistake from their tank. Because as soon as one teammate makes a mistake in 6v6, the amount of pressure put on the other 5 and space that they have to work with is insanely higher. Like, just think of the amount of guns you have in any position to clear the enemy, right? Mistakes are punished harder in 6v6 because you have so many players that are just going to steamroll past whatever's in front once the mistake is made. When you start winning, you win really fast. And in 5v5 with less players, more skirmishy, people are taking cover, they might outshoot you and clutch the fight back. 6v6, much harder to do. Oh, we're winning, we win more. We have space, we take more space. I'm in their spawn, I'm at chip health, and I don't care because I counter you. Well, you put your little beam down, I get to block for 8 seconds now and go out. And I think when people say that there's more skill in Overwatch 6v6, they're thinking of this. They're like, well, this is the skill to go in and out with your team, to know that we get to play the touch the spawn door challenge because our comp counters theirs. That's the skill in the game. You guys are crazy. It's skill in a way, I guess. We put at the feet the steamrolls and snowballs in 5v5, but it's like, this tank on the enemy team went 1-6, guys. There's 1 to 3 limbs on our whole team. The match lasted 6 minutes. Oh my goodness, how long is this video? How many hours have I worked on this? Why did I do this to myself? Marvel Rivals is out. Nobody cares about this subject. I have a couple more points left, guys. Let's try to keep track, okay? Hold me accountable. We were told 6v6 is more balanced, yet meta heroes, meta synergies, hard counter, harder than you could ever counter in 5v5. I suppose if it's the team comps the players want to be playing, then those players aren't going to complain. Doesn't mean it's not true. Okay, another really important point to make is Widowmaker, or really any dominant DPS you could put in this argument, but Widow is the one that people just assume adding an extra tank is going to somehow counteract. But again, as we talked about in the video already, it's not really about how many players, it's about advantage state versus disadvantage state. Because no matter how many players you add to the team comp, Any defenses that can protect you from a Widowmaker can also be used to protect a Widowmaker. It's not a net upgrade to the concepts of the character. And I'm kind of confused how even our top streamers can lie about this when we had several years of Widowmaker metas in Overwatch 1 as well. I don't get it. When are you guys going to stop listening to lies from streamers who are there to entertain you and BS? A Widow with an established sightline or an advantage state is always going to be a heavy burden to overcome in 5v5 or 6v6. In 5v5, because you don't have to heal your tanks as much, I as a support can maybe dedicate my entire life's mission to go duel the Widowmaker. Maybe you could try that in 6v6, but leaving your tank line, who's going to take more damage from their extra player. The extra player's on the tank, right? So it's just harder to get past the tank. It's harder to ignore the tank line. So what happens is the Widow's just more fortified, essentially. In 5v5, Widow's oppressive because there's open lanes everywhere and it's a constant duel. In 6v6, Widow's oppressive because with map control, it's hard to clear past her team to get to her. In theory, with more of a tank fight, these extreme upside carry DPS picks can potentially not do as much, but a frontline cooldown exchange brawl is always harder when you're down a guy. Overwatch has to have a real serious look in the mirror and decide what kind of gameplay it wants to reward, and rather than nerf Sojourn to the ground because pro players exploit her, we need hero bans. Marvel Rivals has several skill shot characters that dominate its game as well. The way you counteract that is hero bans and just having more wacky bullshit. The snipers are oppressive, but Jeff can pull up the whole team and spin them off the map, and he's cute. So what are you really going to complain about? All right, my last and certainly not least major point. Support in 6v6 is pretty bad. It's bad, which is not a take I thought I was going to have, actually. It's surprising for me. When we transitioned from 6v6 originally to 5v5, a lot of support players hated it. I suppose because they were used to the security blanket of 2 tanks. But now that the game is so brawly and so flanky with the map design, the supports very quickly realize the ramifications of their teammates' mistakes. We spent most of the video talking about how oppressive a character like D.Va is, or setting up our Ana as Winston. Well, if everybody wants to go off take their own duels, losing many of them, rather than anchor on your Ana, this is just a miserable hero to play. And a lot of times in general in support, you're gonna have to really carefully choose whether you try to bail out mistakes, which will be happening constantly, forcing you into a heal bot that just sort of prolongs the loss. And it's actually much, much more important to figure out how to gain impact from your position. And it's just harder to do so, in my opinion. Like in 5v5, you're constantly in duels with something. The tank's got extra stats, so you don't have to heal bot them constantly. But in 6v6, it's possible that your tank is just going to straight up die, wanting to fight all the time. And you can choose, well, do I want to fight their 2 tanks with my tank dead? Probably not, right? So you got to like bail your tank out somehow and make use of their decisions. So this was a little surprising to me. I kind of thought tank gameplay would feel worse than it does, but they've actually still got a lot of cool cooldowns and flexibility in the role. The role that takes the biggest L actually is support, because your tanks expect you to heal them, but they take bad engagements, and it's very easy to take bad engagements on these big maps. I mean, it was easy in Overwatch 1 as well, but in those chokes, it was a little bit more obvious of like, well, we're just going to stay on this side of the choke the whole game. We can't get out, obviously. We're getting spawn trapped, and we don't engage until we get an ult. Tanks at 6v6, they don't want to do that. They want to go play and fight and take 3v1s on their face, expecting to get bailed out. Like, that doesn't work. So if you don't have the flexibility of a character like Moira, you're gonna have a horrible time. Oh, and Moira's bullshit. Like, there's more characters on the team. She cleaves through everything. Like, people say Moira doesn't have utility, and they forget that she has a beam weapon, which is actually kind of important to a lot of interactions, but also has cleave. So a lot of the defenses that I was talking about earlier, other than D.Va eating your orbs, having an ultimate that can pierce through shields, cleaving heals and damage at the same time. More players on the screen, more value. Moira is absolutely insane in this mode, and that's not my favorite support to play. I mean, I don't mind playing her. She's fun, but it's, again, like one of those easy forgiving type characters where you want to play a type of game where mistakes are easily punished. Well, pick characters that can make less mistakes. And certainly a mistake that I'm prone to, that I will learn out, is following the decisions of bad players on my team. And a lot of players do that. I see my tanks go up to point, and I assume this means it must be safe, right? Because if there was threats on the left or right, they would have cleared them, right? Tank players, you mark the threats so your backline's not in trouble, right? No, of course not. It's as if they're blind and all they can see is the objective. Oh, my job is to stand on the objective and get shot at. No, playing the strongest role in the game. Remember all that my team can't die stuff? Well, turns out players suck. They don't know how to play tank. That's what makes this even worse, right? Like, people want 6v6 until you play against a tank that knows how to just stand in front of the team properly. And that's like 1% of the population, apparently. You play against that, you can't kill anything. But then the tanks you get on your team just sort of int nonstop, expecting you to give them 4 healers worth of value out of one character. Meanwhile, ironically, especially if you watch my gameplay of us hard winning and barely ever dying as tank, the thing you really do is just anchor, right? Stand in front, anchor a position. That's not what tank players wanted to do. This is why we have Giga tanks, guys, that I'm trying to explain to you. They did the thing they thought the community wanted. Because players want to just run in like ooga booga tanks, like, oh, press buttons, ha ha ha. They gave you characters that could do that. The players are doing this in 6v6, playing Reinhardt, playing the tank synergy characters in 5v5. They do it regardless. This is just how players play the Overwatch game. And I was watching my gameplay back, and only on support did I feel like rage chatting my team. I deleted it every time because I'm trying to be an upstanding citizen and not get mad at my random teammates playing a test environment. But it's the only role I felt I wanted to rage. Like, what the hell are you doing? You're making my life so much harder. I shouldn't be getting 20,000 healing per 10 as Batiste and still be getting blown out. Like, something is wrong there. Don't we think? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong. Stop healing. All healing is giving resources to a teammate who's going to let you down again anyway. Sad, but true. It's sadder still that it's a team game. In 5v5, that decision's much easier to make. In 6v6, if you let your tank die to win a duel, then you're going to have to fight off the 2 tanks later, which probably still isn't going to work for you. Other problems I have with the support role is that the support comps are clearly much more difficult to play around. They're oppressive in 5v5 or 6v6, the support synergies you can get, but having a weaker support in 6v6 is way more punishing. Lifeweaver and Mercy were basically useless, mainly because there's a lot of players in this mode trying to play Rein Zarya, brawler tanks, aggressive tanks that go do things. Lifeweaver and Mercy really like a tank that's like more controlling and skirmishy, like a really defensive hazard with a Pharah above looking to divide and conquer, or a wrecking ball. They like that playstyle because they're supports that are going to be durable on their own, but don't add much of anything, frankly. Mercy adds damage boost to the Pharah, that's it. Almost nothing that significantly helps the tank fight. So if your team takes a tank fight with that support, it's like a joke. You're just asking to lose. So if you get one of those as a support teammate, you basically have to play Ana or Zen. You need something with extreme high upside, or you won't have a chance to win a tank fight ever. You just don't have the stats anywhere. Like, there's no uptrade. I'll say in general, testing Kiri, who was one of my top supports as well, Kiri and Bat probably, with the buffs to her healing, Kiri performed better than I thought she was going to. And I think she's probably one of the better supports to pick when you get a non-tank line, because she can play flanking positions on her own. But the problem is I get ball hog torture on my team, and they get 2 off tanks, which actually is very good against 2 initiator tanks. Zarya Hog or Queen or Maga or anything like that can blow up a tank is really good against Doomfist, Ball Hog, those tanks like that. They will not be able to hold space, not be able to contest cart, do not get to pass go, do not collect $200. And so me as Kiri, like, I'm trying to make use of the space they're making, but they're getting outplayed so bad, I can't really heal them. And if I go for a flank, it's the typical 6v6 problem of like, well, they've got 3 things looking at me now. I don't really get to isolate a duel. That's not how it works. That's not the game mode we're playing. And if I go deeper to make my flanks better, it'll be harder for me to heal my team, which they play like they need. And it's so annoying. I'm actually curious, like, are these tank players trying to sabotage 6v6 by rolling around on the low ground, just taking damage as ball? Like, are these really the tank teammates we're going to get in this mode? What is this? I actually got excited when the Reaper started to all in our backline. I'm like, great, a play I could contribute to. Get a piece of cover and maybe I can hit a headshot and kill. Oh wait, no, they're defensible. So can't hit enough shots. I don't do enough damage. Don't worry guys, we've got double diver versus double peeler. I'm not exactly sure if people just don't know what good or viable tank lines are, because it's been a while since we've played it, but if you remember Overwatch 1, they kind of didn't care then either. So it's hard to really advocate how to support them. And tank players, you can pick a bad tank line, but you gotta outplay it. Like, you can't demand and pull resources while taking a bad fight. That makes the game impossible for your team. I think people think Rein Zarya is the tank synergy you want, but I spent half the video countering it, while also admitting Rein's one of the easiest tanks to add to your team comp. Certainly playing support reminded me just how many layers of mistakes can be in 6v6. Also why it would just be better for me to make content on, because the gaps between how different high-level play is and what average mistakes look like is far more severe. It's a bit severe in 5v5, but it's way, way, way more severe in 6v6, because simple things like shielding your team in front might hard counter the thing that's destroying you. But I certainly felt like I had to do miracles on the support role to stay in fights, whereas the other roles do the things that actually matter to winning, which is setting the pace of engagement, deciding where you're fighting. Those two things matter the most, because that actually matters more than your hero comp selection. But the support position fundamentally doesn't do that. And even the characters that maybe could have, like flanking Kiriko, just isn't really as much of a thing. I remember distinctly when Healbot preferred players were upset that we went from 6v6 to 5v5, but ultimately the map design matters so much more for that. And then also the hero design. There's so many tanks that razzle dazzle in their positioning, and they just don't anchor in front of you as a playstyle. So if you thought you were going to go back to being able to heal dump into your tank like you did in Overwatch 1, that just kind of doesn't exist. It does when they pick the most defensible tanks and play properly, but I can't even say I saw any enemy tank line ever do that to me. It was only me doing it to them when I was on tank. And then even when I was losing on the other roles, it wasn't really because their tanks played so disciplined and slow. It was more like my tanks fed and the fights were over immediately. The new Overwatch 2 maps have a lot of places to go, actually, ironically, giving you a lot more mistakes of where to position as a tank. And that makes supporting them a complete nightmare, because they want you to rush out to heal them while they're not guarding your lane. Maybe they'll learn over time, but I kind of feel like this is probably going to maintain forever, because I don't think they learned it in Overwatch 1, and the maps are just more complicated in Overwatch 2. All right, guys, holy cow. Merry Christmas. I'm pro 6v6 despite all of this. Because this is what you maniacs want, okay? If you can't beat them, join them. Like the video if you're pro 6v6, guys. But especially like the video if you appreciate the only content creator that will actually note the real downsides of this mode. Who else is saying shit like this? Where are you content creators at? Too busy playing Marvel Rivals and shilling. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.